Security was already moving toward Maya Brooks when billionaire Marcus Bell said, "Give her 1 minute." Maya grabbed the red prenup binder and tore through its glued leather spine. A hidden page slipped onto the dinner table. Colette reached for it before anyone had even read a word. Marcus's attorney caught it first. The missing page 8 carried Marcus's original signature and one clear rule: no future spouse could take control of Bell Holdings if he became medically unfit. Marcus stared at Colette as the room went silent. Then his attorney opened a second file and found something even worse. 2 medical evaluations had already been scheduled in Marcus's name, and the first was set for just 3 days after the wedding. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe if you enjoy stories where one small detail can change everything. Maya Brooks had worked in billionaire Marcus Bell's home for 5 years, long enough to know which family traditions mattered more than anyone admitted. Marcus was preparing to marry Colette Dane in 3 weeks, and that evening, the Bell family gathered for a formal dinner to review the final prenuptial agreement. Colette had invited her lawyer, Graham Vale, a polished man who made every sentence sound settled. Marcus's own attorney, Helen Price, sat across from him with a legal pad and a stack of notes. Maya moved quietly around the long dining table in her light lavender maid uniform, pouring water and clearing plates. She had no interest in the legal talk. Then Graham placed a red leather binder in front of Marcus, and Maya stopped for half a second. Something about it was wrong. Years earlier, before Edward Bell died, Maya had spent many afternoons helping Marcus's father organize family records. Edward had become too weak to manage the heavy archive boxes alone, but his mind remained sharp. He taught Maya his filing habits because he hated careless paperwork. Important contracts went into plain archival binders. Critical pages sometimes had a certified duplicate folded inside a narrow compartment in the spine. Edward marked those special binders with one thin gold archival thread beneath the leather, so anyone trained in his system would know to check the spine before replacing anything. Maya never studied law. Edward simply taught her how to protect records from substitution. Now, as Graham opened the red prenup, Maya noticed 2 things. The binder looked thicker than it should, and a tiny gold thread was caught near the lower edge of the spine. Maya continued serving, while the lawyers reviewed the agreement page by page. The first sections covered personal property, homes, trusts, and what each person would keep if the marriage ended. Colette smiled and said the contract protected them both. Then Helen reached a section tied to Bell Holdings, the company Marcus had inherited from his father. Maya was setting down coffee when she saw the page numbers. 7 was followed by a separate sheet titled Emergency Spousal Proxy. After that came page 9. There was no page 8. The proxy said that after marriage, if 2 doctors declared Marcus medically unable to manage his affairs, Colette could temporarily exercise his voting rights. Marcus had a controlled heart rhythm condition, so the clause did not sound absurd, but Edward Bell had been fiercely protective of company control. Maya looked at the missing number again. Where was page 8? She waited until Helen paused. "Mr. Bell, may I mention something?" Every face turned toward her. Marcus nodded. Maya calmly pointed out that the numbered section went from 7 to 9. Graham gave a short laugh and said schedules were often inserted between numbered pages. Maya accepted that, then mentioned the gold thread in the spine. Graham's smile disappeared. He told her she was confusing household filing habits with legal drafting and said staff should not interrupt a private legal review. Colette watched with a patient smile, waiting for Marcus to end it. Instead, Maya explained that Edward used gold thread only on binders with a protected duplicate hidden inside the binding. Graham immediately told the security officer near the door to escort her out. Marcus raised one hand. "No, she gets 1 minute." That minute changed the room. Maya said she was not accusing anyone and was not trying to interpret the contract. She only knew Edward's archive system because she had helped maintain it. The red binder was thicker than his standard files, the gold thread was visible, and a numbered page appeared to be missing. Marcus looked at Helen. She examined the spine without damaging it, then checked the table of contents. It referred to a Bell family governance rider incorporated into the agreement. Graham said that rider had been replaced years ago, and the emergency proxy was the current version. Helen asked for the newer amendment. Graham produced a clean copy from his briefcase within seconds. It appeared to carry Marcus's initials. Marcus frowned. He remembered signing many corporate papers after his father's death, but not this one clearly. For the first time that night, Colette stopped smiling. Helen refused to approve anything until she checked the family archive. Marcus agreed and ended the review early. Colette remained calm, saying she understood why he wanted certainty. Graham warned that opening the binder could damage an execution copy and create questions about authenticity. Maya said nothing. She had never suggested opening it without permission. As Graham left, he passed close enough to tell her quietly, "You should learn the difference between being helpful and being in the way." Maya did not answer. A few minutes later, Marcus thanked her for speaking up, but asked her not to touch the binder or search his father's records herself. "Let Helen handle the law," he said. Maya agreed, but when she returned to clear the table, one phrase on Graham's amendment caught her eye: Bell Capital Stewardship Committee. She had seen that exact name only recently on new company folders. The next morning, Helen and Marcus entered Edward Bell's archive room with the current records manager. Maya stayed outside until Helen called her in for one question. She showed Maya several old binders and asked where Edward normally placed the gold thread. Maya pointed to the same lower section she had noticed on the prenup. Helen then opened Edward's handwritten archive index. Near the bottom of one page was a reference to a protected document, Governance Rider, page 8, Spousal Control Prohibited. Marcus read the words twice. The note did not prove the page was still hidden in the red binder, and it did not prove Graham's amendment was false, but it proved Maya had remembered Edward's system correctly. Page 8 had existed, and its purpose had been the exact opposite of Colette's new emergency proxy. Helen spent the afternoon comparing the old rider, the supposed amendment, and Bell Holdings records. By late day, she found something that made her call Marcus back into the study and lock the door. Graham's amendment claimed Marcus had signed it 2 years earlier, yet it referred to the Bell Capital Stewardship Committee by that exact name. Helen placed the company history file beside it. The committee had not received that name until 8 months after the date printed on the amendment. The document could not mention a name that did not yet exist. Marcus went still. Helen ordered the prenup secured and asked security for access logs covering Edward's archive. Maya stood near the doorway as the first report printed. One entry appeared at 12:14 a.m., 3 weeks earlier. Graham Vale had entered the locked archive using temporary legal team access and stayed inside for 47 minutes. According to the camera log, he carried nothing in when he entered, but when he left, he was holding a red leather binder. Helen did not celebrate when the access log appeared. A lawyer entering an archive after midnight looked bad, but looking bad was not the same as proving fraud. Graham Vale had been given temporary access because he was helping prepare Marcus Bell's wedding documents, and the camera outside the archive could not show what he did once the door closed. When Marcus confronted him the next morning, Graham stayed calm. He said he had borrowed an old governance binder to compare language and returned it before sunrise because the family dinner was close. He also dismissed the strange committee name on the amendment as a later formatting update. According to him, the legal change itself had been approved 2 years earlier, and someone had simply typed the modern committee name into a cleaner copy. Colette stood beside him, disappointed rather than angry, and told Marcus she wanted the review completed. For a few uncomfortable minutes, even Helen had to admit that explanation was possible. Then Graham produced something stronger, a scanned copy of an older amendment that used the committee's former name. It carried Marcus's initials at the bottom of every page and appeared to show that he had agreed years ago to replace his father's spousal control restriction. Marcus stared at the initials and said they looked like his. He also remembered signing a thick estate planning packet around that time after Edward's health had declined. Colette did not push him. She simply said, Maybe your father changed his mind before he died. That was enough to unsettle Marcus. If the older amendment was genuine, the missing page 8 might be authentic and still have no power. Maya had found a real clue, but perhaps one that led nowhere. Graham looked at her across the room and said nothing. He did not need to. The question now was not whether Edward Bell had once protected Marcus. It was whether Marcus himself had later removed that protection. Helen refused to rely on appearance. She asked Graham for the original paper amendment, the electronic source file, witness information, and the complete execution history. Graham said the original had been destroyed during routine digitization, which Helen found unusual for a document affecting control of Bell Holdings. The scan had no visible notary seal because, he explained, notarization had not been required. 2 employee signatures appeared as witnesses. One belonged to a former family office administrator named Daniel Crow. The other belonged to an accountant who still worked for Bell Holdings. Helen interviewed the accountant first. He remembered signing a stack of routine acknowledgments in Marcus's study, but he could not remember the amendment. Daniel Crow was harder to reach because he had retired to Arizona. Meanwhile, Maya returned to her normal duties. She did not search drawers or question staff. Edward had taught her that preserving a record mattered more than proving a suspicion quickly. The first real break came from the scan itself. Helen's digital specialist found that the PDF had been created only 6 weeks earlier, even though Graham claimed it had been scanned 2 years ago. Graham answered that his office had rescanned an older paper copy when preparing the prenup. Again, it was suspicious but not impossible. Then Daniel Crow finally called back. He remembered the week printed on the amendment because he had been in Canada attending his daughter's wedding. He sent Helen airline confirmations and family photographs with dates. He could not have stood in Marcus's study and witnessed anything that day. Graham responded that the date might have been entered later in error. Marcus's patience began to disappear. 1 wrong detail could be a mistake, 2 might still be careless work. But every time Helen found a problem, Graham had a new explanation waiting. Colette changed tactics. Instead of defending Graham, she suggested Marcus postpone the legal review until after the wedding. She said the stress was already affecting his sleep and reminded him that his heart rhythm condition became worse when he was exhausted. Her concern sounded loving, but Maya noticed how quickly Colette returned to Marcus's health whenever control of the company came up. Marcus noticed it too. He told her the wedding could wait if necessary. For the first time, anger flashed across Colette's face before she covered it with a smile. That afternoon, Helen discovered another detail. The supposed older amendment had never appeared in Edward Bell's archive index, Marcus's family office register, or any board packet from the year it was supposedly signed. A document that changed emergency voting control of a billion-dollar company had somehow existed for 2 years without leaving a normal record anywhere. Security then reviewed the night Graham entered the archive. The hallway footage showed him arriving empty-handed at 12:14 a.m. and leaving 47 minutes later with the red leather binder. But a second camera near the guest offices added something new. At 1:09 a.m., Graham entered the temporary office assigned to his legal team with the binder under his arm. At 1:36, a printer on that floor produced 12 pages. The print log could not show the words on them, but it identified Graham's laptop as the source. At 1:48, he carried the red binder back toward the archive. The next morning, the same printer produced the emergency spousal proxy now sitting inside Marcus's prenup packet. Helen preserved the logs and warned everyone not to touch the binder. Maya asked only one question. If he had the old binder with him, why did he need to print a new page in the middle of the night? No one had a good answer. If you believe a person should be heard because of what they notice, not dismissed because of the uniform they wear, comment, never judge. By then, Marcus no longer saw Maya's concern as an interruption. He asked Helen to examine every document Graham had prepared for the wedding. That search uncovered a private schedule attached to Colette's post-wedding travel plans. Most entries were ordinary: hotel bookings, dinners, charity visits, but 2 appointments were listed only as executive wellness. Both were with doctors Marcus had never met. The first was scheduled 3 days after the honeymoon began. Colette claimed her assistant must have arranged them as a surprise health check because she worried about Marcus. Marcus did not believe her explanation, but Helen still needed proof that the medical appointments were connected to the emergency proxy rather than simple concern. Late that evening, Helen's specialist recovered the document history from the printer server. The emergency spousal proxy had not begun as a standard legal form. Its earliest saved version carried a different file name, MB Medical Control Draft. The file had been created on Graham's laptop the same night he removed Edward's binder from the archive. A second user had opened it remotely 9 minutes later from the private guest suite assigned to Colette. Helen placed the access report in front of Marcus without saying a word. Marcus read Colette's login name once, then again. Before anyone could call her back into the room, the specialist opened the next recovered file and saw a draft instruction telling a doctor exactly which symptoms to record after the wedding. Helen did not let anyone leave the study with a copy of the recovered medical draft. She had the file preserved and called Marcus's outside corporate counsel before speaking to Colette or Graham again. The draft was short, but its language was disturbing. It listed symptoms Marcus did not have: confusion after exertion, memory lapses, poor judgment, and disorientation, and placed them under an executive capacity review. Notes beside the symptoms explained how they could support a finding that Marcus should temporarily step away from voting decisions. Marcus read the page in silence. His heart condition had never affected his thinking. He took medication, saw his cardiologist regularly, and had run Bell Holdings without medical restriction. Yet, the document had been created before either scheduled examination. Somebody was not waiting to learn what the doctors found. Somebody was preparing the answer first. Marcus wanted to confront Colette immediately, but Helen stopped him. The evidence was serious, not complete. Colette's account had opened the file, but that did not prove she wrote it. More important, the red binder remained intact. If Edward Bell had hidden a certified duplicate of page 8 inside the spine, opening it in anger would invite questions about handling and authenticity. Helen proposed something Marcus hated but understood: proceed with the formal signing dinner as scheduled, keep the binder under observation, and let both legal teams work from Graham's packet. No signatures would become final without Helen's approval. Security would record who touched the documents, and an outside records specialist would remain nearby. Maya would serve dinner as planned and say nothing unless she saw the archival mark again. The dinner was no longer about a prenup. It was about learning who expected Marcus to lose control of his company. The dining room filled just after 7. Marcus's sister and 2 older relatives sat along one side of the long table. Colette arrived in a cream evening dress, composed enough that no casual observer would have guessed anything was wrong. Graham came carrying the same red leather binder and a slim document case. Helen placed her own files beside Marcus, but did not mention the printer logs, false witness date, or medical draft. Maya moved between the chairs with water and coffee. Graham described the emergency spouse proxy as protection for Marcus and the company. Colette reached for Marcus's hand and said she hoped they could finish the paperwork and enjoy the days before the wedding. Then Graham opened the governance section. Maya saw the page numbers again: 7, the proxy sheet, then 9, and this time she noticed something new. A short piece of gold thread was trapped beneath leather that looked newer than the rest of the spine. Maya set down the coffee pot. "Mr. Bell, may I show Ms. Price something?" Graham turned toward her before Marcus answered. He said the household staff had already delayed the process and told security to remove her. Colette did not object. Marcus told security to stay where they were and asked Maya what she had found. She pointed without touching the binder. The leather near the lower spine showed a faint line of fresh adhesive, and the gold thread disappeared beneath it. Maya explained that Edward used the thread to mark the narrow compartment holding a certified backup page. If the binder had been opened and resealed, the thread could become trapped that way. Graham warned Marcus that tearing apart the execution copy would destroy a legal document. Helen examined the edge, then looked at Marcus. "The binder is yours," she said. "If you want it opened, we can document every step." Marcus looked at Colette, then Graham, than the binder his father's system had protected for years. "Open it," he said. Helen set up a phone to record the process and asked Maya to show where Edward would have placed the compartment. Maya slipped a small letter opener under the loose leather and carefully lifted the glued lining. The first strip resisted, the second came free with a soft tearing sound. Graham stood so quickly his chair struck the floor. Maya pulled the lining back another inch, and a folded cream-colored sheet slid from the spine onto the table. Before Helen could reach it, Colette lunged forward with one hand. Marcus caught her wrist before she touched the paper. "Why do you want that?" he asked. Colette froze. She had reached for the page before anyone had read a single word. Helen put on document gloves, lifted the sheet, and unfolded it inside a clear sleeve. At the top was the missing number, page 8. Below it were Edward Bell's signature, Marcus's signature, and certification marks listed in the old archive index. Helen read the key clause aloud. No spouse could receive emergency voting control of Bell Holdings merely because Marcus became medically unable to serve. Temporary authority would pass to a 3-person governance committee until independent medical and legal review was complete. Graham's separate proxy did the exact opposite. Marcus stared at the 2 pages side by side. Graham claimed the hidden page was obsolete and pointed to the later amendment. Helen slid another file across the table and asked why that amendment named a committee 8 months before the committee had that name. Graham's face lost color. For the first time, Colette stopped letting Graham speak for her. She said she had trusted him to prepare the agreement and knew nothing about old family binders. Graham turned toward her and said the medical proxy had been requested because she worried about Marcus's health. Colette denied asking for any forged document. Their careful partnership began to crack in front of the family. Helen did not argue. She placed the printer history, Daniel Crow's travel records, and the midnight archive logs beside page 8. Marcus asked about the 2 medical appointments after the wedding. Colette called them routine. Helen asked why a draft capacity report already listed symptoms Marcus had never experienced. Colette looked at Graham. Graham said nothing. Every explanation now seemed to create another problem. Then, Helen's outside counsel entered from the adjoining study with a sealed folder from Bell Holdings' compliance office. They had traced the phrase medical control through Graham's recovered files and found another document created the same week as the false amendment. It was a draft board resolution to be used if Marcus lost voting authority. The resolution approved the sale of 3 Bell commercial properties to a private investment group at a price far below their latest internal valuation. Marcus recognized them immediately. Together, they were among the most valuable assets his father had left him. Helen turned to the ownership page. 2 names were linked to the buyer through holding companies. One belonged to Graham. The other belonged to Colette. Marcus looked at the woman he had planned to marry and asked, "How long have you been planning to take my company?" Before she could answer, Helen noticed the handwritten date beside the draft sale, 3 days after the wedding. Marcus did not answer Colette's question for her. He closed the red binder, asked everyone at the table to leave the documents exactly where they were, and called Bell Holdings' outside counsel and security director into the room. Helen Price photographed the table, placed page 8 in a protective sleeve, and documented who had handled each item. Graham tried to argue that the dinner had become emotional and that everyone should wait until morning. Marcus refused. He was not going to sign anything, and the wedding was over. Colette asked to speak with him alone, but Helen advised against any private discussion until the records were secured. Within an hour, the prenup, the hidden page, the false amendment, the printer logs, and copies of the medical draft were transferred to an independent document examiner. What had begun as a missing page was now a possible fraud involving control of an entire company. The next morning brought the first result. The examiner confirmed that the hidden page 8 was consistent with the age, paper stock, toner, and binding materials used in Edward Bell's original governance records. Marcus's signature matched other verified signatures from that same period. The supposed later amendment was different. Its paper came from a batch purchased by Graham's firm only 2 months earlier, and the printed date was years older than the sheet itself. Marcus's initials appeared to have been copied from another document and placed onto the amendment. That alone did not prove Colette had planned the scheme, but investigators now had a forged corporate record, a false witness trail, and footage of Graham removing the binder from the archive after midnight. Then Helen received a call from Bell Holdings' compliance office. The medical appointments were not merely appointments. One of the doctors had already been paid. The payment did not come directly from Colette or Graham. It came from a small consulting company that appeared unrelated to either of them. Financial investigators followed the ownership records and found that Graham controlled the company through a business partner. The doctor had received 2 payments marked as executive health consulting, even though Marcus had never met him. The recovered draft report listed symptoms Marcus did not have and suggested that his judgment should be reviewed after a recent decline. Marcus's own cardiologist supplied years of records showing a controlled heart rhythm condition with no history of confusion, memory loss, or impaired decision-making. The forged proxy required 2 doctors, not 1, so Graham's plan could not succeed with the bribed physician alone. Investigators believed the first false report was meant to influence a second independent doctor who would be given incomplete or misleading medical information. The plan was more careful than Marcus had imagined, and that made it more frightening. The real motive appeared inside the draft property sale. 3 commercial buildings owned by Bell Holdings were scheduled to be transferred to a private investment group only days after the wedding. The proposed price was far below the company's latest internal valuation. On the surface, neither Colette nor Graham appeared as buyers. Behind 2 holding companies, however, investigators found financial interests connected to both of them. If Marcus had been declared temporarily unable to manage company affairs, the false emergency proxy would have allowed Colette to exercise his voting rights long enough to support the sale. The genuine page 8 prevented exactly that by sending temporary authority to an independent 3-person committee. Edward Bell had written the safeguard years before anyone knew Colette. He had not been predicting her. He had simply understood that family control should never depend on one person's marriage or illness. Colette continued to deny knowing the documents were forged. She said Graham had handled the legal structure and that her interest in the investment group was only a future business opportunity. Graham, through his attorney, blamed Colette for requesting stronger control after the wedding. Neither explanation settled the matter, so investigators went back to the records. Search warrants and preserved account data uncovered messages discussing the medical window, the timing of the board vote, and the need to complete the property sale before Marcus could return to full control. One message from Colette asked whether 3 days after the wedding was too soon. Another from Graham replied that sooner was safer if the medical paperwork was ready. Their words were not a dramatic confession, but paired with the forged amendment, hidden financial interests, payments to the doctor, and archive footage, they gave prosecutors a far clearer picture of the plan. The engagement ended without a public scene. Marcus canceled the wedding, notified the board, and placed all major property transactions under temporary independent review. Colette moved out of the estate under arrangements handled by attorneys. Graham was removed from every Bell matter. In the weeks that followed, both faced charges connected to fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted misuse of corporate records, while the doctor faced investigation over the payments and false medical material. The final charges would be decided by prosecutors and courts, not by Marcus. He refused to turn the case into revenge. Instead, he ordered a complete review of Bell Holdings' document controls, outside legal access, medical authorization procedures, and emergency voting rules. He also admitted something uncomfortable to his family. He had trusted polished explanations because they came from people with titles, while Maya had been nearly removed from the room for noticing a missing number. A week later, Marcus asked Maya to meet him in Edward's old archive room. The damaged red binder sat on the table between them. He offered her a large reward for saving the company from a plan that could have cost Bell Holdings millions. Maya thanked him and declined. She told him she did not want a gift that depended on one extraordinary night. She wanted work that respected what she had actually learned. Marcus asked what that would look like. Maya had already thought about it. She wanted a formal position overseeing records integrity for the Bell family office, a professional salary, written authority to report irregularities without going through household management, training in modern record systems, and direct access to outside auditors when something serious did not match. Marcus smiled for the first time in days. "That sounds less like a reward," he said. "It sounds like a job," Maya answered. "That's exactly what I'm asking for." 6 months later, Maya walked into the archive room wearing professional office clothes instead of her maid uniform. Her new title was Records Integrity Manager, and the authority written into her contract mattered more to her than the title itself. The torn red binder had not been repaired. It rested inside a clear archival case with the damaged spine visible, beside the genuine page 8 and a note explaining why the original binding was preserved. Marcus kept it there as a reminder that a company worth billions had nearly changed hands because everyone at the table was reading what was present, while Maya noticed what was missing. Edward Bell had once taught her that records protect people only when someone cares enough to check them. She finally understood how right he had been, and if you believe careful people deserve to be heard no matter what job they hold, subscribe and stay with us for the next story.